The federal Liberals have announced Bill C-21, new gun control legislation. Among other things, it will introduce a voluntary buyback program for banned firearms and allow municipalities to ban handguns and increase criminal penalties. We're already getting reaction from Vancouver Mayor Kennedy Stewart, as you heard in the news. This comes 9 months after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a ban on the use, sale, and importation of military-grade, what are considered assault-style weapons. This announcement was made in May last year, about 2 weeks after the Nova Scotia gun massacre, considered the deadliest mass shooting in Canadian history. Well, today we are asking you for your reaction to these gun control measures, and do you think it will do anything meaningful to stop gun violence? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733, and on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can tweet us too, at BC Today, or email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined now by Rob Gordon. He's a professor and criminologist at Simon Fraser University. And good afternoon, Rob. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Michelle.
I'll go first to the buyback program. How effective do you think this program would be?
Well, it's only one element in any kind of program designed to try to reduce the numbers of these weapons that have appeared, most of which are coming over the border. So it certainly helps. I've just spent about an hour zipping through some research in preparation for this, and the conclusion that's reached is that it is helpful. If it's one component of a larger strategy to deal with a challenging problem, then okay, go ahead. There's no harm in doing it. But don't have high expectations, and don't rely solely on voluntary involvement. Some jurisdictions have gone over to mandatory buybacks, which appear to be a little bit more effective, and especially where they're occurring in conjunction with some horrendous event that's occurred. So there's a lot of public support for it. And I won't bother to go through all the ghastly examples, but it certainly is helpful.
And you've just mentioned a couple of things which have been raised as criticism of this today. There are some who say, the fact that the buyback program is not mandatory is disappointing. And others, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, saying this program, is targeting law-abiding gun owners and doesn't target the real problem, which is criminals.
Well, okay, we hear these arguments going around and around. Certainly, legitimate owners of firearms have a beef, and that's fair enough, especially if you're living in a rural area and you need a firearm to deal with various challenges from the wildlife in those areas. I get all that, and most people, I think, would feel sympathetic, but you don't need an Armalite rifle to deal with cougars. I mean, it's ridiculous to expect anyone to accept that as being a reasonable excuse for retaining a high-power military-style weapon and using it for, quote, target practice, unquote. Those kinds of major firearms are designed for only one thing, and that is to kill people. And I don't think we really have any sound argument for retaining those, especially in urban areas. Now, certainly in the United States, there's a lot of strong emotions surrounding possession of these weapons, but I think we should separate ourselves from our cousins to the south. They're clearly not doing very well in this regard.
Well, take us through what has been banned here, what's being called assault-style weapons. It's not a legal definition here, but what have they actually banned and why?
Well, it's 1,500, apparently, approximately 1,500 military-style weapons that are automatic or semi-automatic weapons that are used usually in military contexts. So if you want to start a small army, get a bunch of these. If you want to go hunting, they're the worst thing you could possibly imagine So it's not even a very good weapon for killing off, deer. If you shoot a deer in the head with an Armalite rifle, it's going to explode all over the place. I mean, it's just not. It doesn't make any sense, and it's the gung-ho cowboys that seem to want to hold these things and hang on to them. And I don't think that there's really any reasonable explanation for or reasonable excuse for having them. So the same argument goes for high-power handguns, which, of course, are in many respects a different kettle of fish. You've got a great deal of attraction towards these kinds of weapons. Are they used for hunting? No, I don't think so. They're designed for one purpose and one purpose only. Again, like the higher power military weapons, they're designed to kill people.
And
that's
Rob,
the bottom line.
Under this legislation, what would happen, say, because the buyback program is voluntary, what would happen if you owned a weapon like this and decided not to volunteer to sell it back?
Well, if it complies with other firearms regulations in Canada, then you're free to retain it, to hold on to that weapon. Use is something else, and of course, carrying it in certain ways and storing the weapon in certain ways are all subject to other regulations, and good for that. But you cannot expect people to believe that carrying a Glock handgun, 9mm handgun, which is in many police forces standard equipment, is for the purposes of hunting or for any other legitimate reason. Maybe shooting at targets. I don't think so. You don't usually have a weapon like that for that purpose.
We are going to hear from a sports shooter in a moment here. We'd love to hear from our listeners. What is your reaction to these gun control measures? Do you think they will do anything meaningful to stop gun violence? The federal government announcing a voluntary buyback program for banned firearms. Also, measures to allow municipalities to ban handguns as well as to increase criminal penalties. We're taking your reaction. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can tweet us at BC Today or send us an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. Dustin has been waiting in Burnaby to comment. Hi, Dustin. Welcome.
Hi. I'm so actually really disappointed in the CBC for putting on this person who's given so much terrible misinformation. I actually can't believe you guys have broadcast it, honestly. So I'm a sports shooter.
You're a sports shooter. What do you think of the legislation?
I'm a sports shooter, and I would like to say I'm also a hunter. And the AR-15 in particular shoots a .223 Remington 5.56 NATO round that is absolutely legal and adequate to hunt deer, cougars, and coyotes. It is a hunting round. So to say, oh yeah, this is a high-powered rifle that absolutely nobody needs, it's a hunting round that is chambered in hundreds of other guns that are still legal to hunt in this province and in this country. So he's already misinformed the public, and that's infuriating. 9mm, by the way, also legal, completely legal hunting round in pistol caliber carbines. Handgun hunting was legal in Canada until handguns were banned from being taken anywhere but the range when they were restricted. But handgun hunting was legal. It is legal in the United States and in many other places in the world. So you've got a person there, a so-called expert, who's just misinformed hundreds of thousands of people in British Columbia. This is so infuriating.
Well, let's stick to the issue. I will get a response from Rob in a moment. But what about this? So you have these. You're a hunter. You're a sports shooter. Tell us about the weapons that you do have. Are they ones that that would fall under this program?
Yeah, I have a dozen, literally a dozen guns that were banned on May 1st. And then I have some that operate exactly the same that weren't banned. Nobody can articulate to me why these guns were banned and these ones were not, although they did manage to completely destroy the sport of three-gun, which is the sport that I partook in, which consisted of shooting an AR-15 rifle, most semi-automatic centerfire .223 rifles, a handgun, and a shotgun. So the idea that, there's no good reason for me to have these things. And I will say, by the way, that he's misinforming the public on the handgun issue, too. Handguns haven't been legally allowed to be carried by civilians in this country for 40 years. So to suggest nobody needs this, nobody's carrying them around. The only people carrying them around are criminals who already aren't possessing them legally. It's the same thing with all the guns. Kennedy Stewart talking about a handgun ban in British Columbia that will do, or in Vancouver, that will do nothing but affect people who legally register them, because those are the only ones that are registered and where they can be identified where they are.
Right. And Dustin, pardon me, the weapons that you do have, that you say the ones that have been banned, what are your plans there?
Well, I after listening to Bill Blair talk about giving me $1,300 for my $3,000 a piece rifles, I'm probably not going to do that. That's a huge embarrassment on their part. You know, I've got multiple rifles worth over $3,000, and I'm now being told that they're going to be worth like $1,300 to $1,500, or I can keep them and I'll never be allowed to shoot them again. Unless we get a conservative government that'll fix this. But that idea is insane too, that I can keep the guns. I'm safe enough to keep them. And right now, for the last year, I've been safe enough to legally keep them in my safe, but God forbid I go to the range, because that's what the government has said. Too dangerous to go to the range with these guns.
Sorry, go ahead.
But I have other guns that use the same ammunition, the same magazines, the same action type that are still legal. Right. The government can't articulate. You brought it up, and you should really hold them to this, that there is no legal definition for assault weapon. You guys are just using like the same sort of inflammatory terminology to scare people that don't know anything about this.
But when you hear about AR-15, the way it has been used, for example, in the United States,
the only one that's been used in a mass shooting in Canadian history was Nova Scotia. And it was smuggled from the United States.
Do you have concerns, though, about the ability of these guns and the ease with which they can actually harm and kill people?
Any gun can harm and kill people. Like, that's just a reality, right? He's talking about high-powered assault rifle. Well, my .308 hunting rifle, bolt-action rifle, fires a substantially larger round that does a substantially larger amount of damage. Yet that's okay. He's not taking issue with me hunting deer with that. Like, beyond the fact that he clearly doesn't hunt, you don't shoot deer in the head, by the way. But again, you're using so-called experts to tell people, well, this is scary, but this is okay. When we're talking about calibers, we're talking about orders of magnitude. Well, I'm upset with the CBC not getting real experts and not holding both the government to task. Because really, the hypocrisy that's been demonstrated is hilarious, and you're not holding your own experts to task. Like some of the people that you've had just to use inflammatory language and give misinformation, my head's exploded right now.
And Dustin, as our last question to you, thank you for the points you've made. But as a last question to you, when it comes to gun violence and concerns around gun violence, how do you suggest that be tackled then?
I think they take all the hundreds of millions of dollars they're about to waste and actually throw it at some good community outreach programs. There's so many good programs out there that would stop kids from ending up on the streets in gangs using guns that are being smuggled in illegally, which is the majority of them are being smuggled from the United States anyways, unregistered, never traced. Those guns from being used on people, and we'll stop seeing kids get killed in the streets by 20-year-old gangsters.
Dustin, thank you for the call. That's Dustin in Burnaby. I'm going to go back to our guest, Rob Gordon, criminologist at Simon Fraser University. What's your response, Rob? A lot was brought up there.
It's a polarizing issue. We know that, and these kinds of emotive responses are entirely predictable. It's going to make it very difficult for the federal government to introduce this sort of legislation. I'm not at all happy with them passing the buck down to the municipalities. I don't understand that kind of trickery, political trickery. This is a national issue. And I'm speaking here of the handgun ban. I'm sorry, but I just don't see any reason why a person living in a metropolitan area would need to carry or use a handgun. Sure, it's a sport, but it still is hard to justify unless a person is so tied to weaponry that they just simply can't surrender this sort of stuff. It's a very emotional issue, and I don't think a solution is going to be forthcoming without some significant, strong legislation and strong messaging from the federal government. I don't think it should be provincial. I don't think it should be a municipal issue.
And we touched there on, what are solutions then to gun violence? And you said this is, the buyback program is one aspect. What do you make of things like more tightening restrictions at the border, for example?
Well, that most certainly is, in my view, the source of the bulk of this of the weaponry. Now, I've seen reports done by the RCMP and other groups looking at the source of firearms, but I just that sort of research is a bit weak, and strengthening border controls. Yes, I mean, it'd be interesting to know how much is getting over the border at this point, since COVID has been upon us, since the pandemic began. I happen to think there's probably still a lot coming across because there are ways of getting around border controls. If you're a hiker in our mountainous area here, you know the ways across. So, people are bringing stuff in illegally. Certainly clamping down on the importation of firearms coming in over the border, being brought in by, in particular by Americans visiting the United States, I would think is very helpful, not because they're necessarily coming in to use them for illegal purposes, but because what they have gets stolen. It's a little bit like the argument behind handgun amnesties and firearms and amnesties generally. It's not what the person's going to do with the weapon. It's what happens if somebody breaks into their home and steals the weapon. The weapon ends up then being used in a crime. This is a continuing debate, obviously.
Let's take another call. Anthony is on the line from New Westminster. Hi, Anthony.
Hello. Having worked in Emerge in a major trauma hospital in Metro Vancouver for 13 years, I've yet to see a gunshot injury caused by long rifle. Every one of them was, that I can recall, was a 9mm or a .45 caliber, rarely a .32. These criminals buy these guns to kill. That's the point of them. So, and they're with an automatic like a Glock or a Beretta. Okay, they just pull every time you pull the trigger, you fire one. So I've seen victims with seven or eight gunshot wounds, high power. They have entry and exit wounds. Okay, so I'm looking at this thinking, if you want to fix the problem, you really have to go to the court system. You get caught with an automatic weapon or any one of these weapons in a crime, minimum 5 years. Okay, the only way to fix this is to have some serious teeth in the criminal system. What the Liberals are doing right now is just virtue signaling. What we're going to see here is a ton of money wasted like the long gone registry. It won't make any difference. If you want to make a difference here, it has to be in the legal system and to give the police more powers. Because until you decrease the number of illegal guns, and by the way, these criminals that have got these 9mm and 45s, I would doubt if any of them were legal. I would bet you they're all stolen. And by the way, with my friends that shoot, they have trigger locks, they have case locks, and they have armories in their house where they put their guns in. So it's a triple locking system, and the amount of regulation when they transport their guns to the gun range are incredible. So they're not the problem here. It's the illegal guns coming in from across outside the country and being used in criminal action. So you want to stop this? It's got to be at the court system, minimum 5 years per violation, period.
Anthony, thank you very much. Richard is up next in Vancouver. Hi, Richard.
Hi there.
Hi, what do you make of these? Yeah, thanks for calling. What do you think?
It's frivolous. I don't think it's, after listening to other callers, I don't think I'm as passionate as they are. I'd like to think I'm rational, but I think it's frivolous. I think if you're looking at firearms, I don't want to call them weapons because that already puts them in a specific narrative and a class of their own. So let's just call them what they are. They're firearms, they're tools, they're guns. Weapons, well, you can put anything into that class, so you might as well ban everything. But it's saying that guns or firearms are going to be controlled with buybacks and this ban and all this other stuff in municipalities and national level is kind of ridiculous because if they're going to be doing something illegal, they'll obtain the tool in any way, shape, and form, and they'll find a way to do it. It's like saying don't sell luxury cars with high-powered engines to people because they're going to use them to run over people. Well, if people are going to drive crazy or if they're going to drive illegal or without insurance or just flout the laws, they'll do it and they'll find a way to get that vehicle.
Okay.
So I don't like the narrative, because when you're putting it as a weapon, then you're singling it out. It's not a political thing, it's a cultural thing. And if there's talking about bans, well, then you might as well hold the police and the military to account, because there's a lot of problems there with all kinds of shady stuff going on between the military and the police.
Richard, I think your point kind of follows up on the previous point as well, which is I think what you're saying is this doesn't do anything about those who get their guns illegally. We have a tweet here, in fact, from Takarua, who writes, Vancouver bylaw restricting handguns is flaccid at best and does nothing to reduce street violence. I have a firearms license, took half a year to clear. With that license comes responsibility and a loss of rights. Police can enter my home for any reason to check compliance. Takarua, thank you very much. And I'll go back to Rob Gordon here. There is a process for people to be able to obtain licenses for being able to own a firearm legally. I guess the question is, can you see why they may feel targeted, I guess, by this kind of legislation?
Well, yes, but let's not forget that the ineffectiveness of buyback programs usually arises where there's nothing else. So any kind of program like this that's intended to limit possession and use of military-style weapons is going to not work if that's all there is in the armory. You need more tools, and there's no question about that whatsoever. But you've still got to get the guns under control. They're on the streets. They're coming over the border in probably less numbers than has previously been the case, but they still need to be strictly regulated, and possession needs to be strongly responded to by government. No question, in my view, that is what's required. But there'll be people who disagree. People who have, a dozen prohibited weapons or a dozen weapons that are purportedly for hunting purposes in their homes, I think are being incredibly irresponsible. I do not understand that at all.
They do see themselves as responsible gun owners, though.
Yes, well, I mean, is that a contradiction in terms? Why do you need a gun? I mean,
well, they can have them for hunting and for sport. Yes,
you're right. And I wonder about that system of licensing. But anyway, I mean, as I say, it's a long discussion, and it's going to continue to be emotive.
Certainly emotive, and one that really rouses up strong opinion. Let's take another one from Russ in North Vancouver. Hi, Russ.
Hey there, how are you?
I am well. Thanks for calling.
Hey, thanks for having me. So I've been a hunter and a gun owner for over 30 years. I totally agree with one of your first callers there. And one of your second callers. They both had good points. I believe that the handguns is the issues with the gangs, and what needs to be done there is exactly what the second or third caller said. It needs to be the courts that step up and tell these lawyers just to sit back, and if you get caught using a weapon, a handgun especially, but any weapon really, like a gun, then you go to jail for 5 to 10 years without any. It's just right away, automatic. Like, this is going to at least make them think twice before they use those illegal handguns. The sporting rifles and all that, there's so many regulations already in place. I'd like to see the statistics that show what Mr. Trudeau is saying, because I don't believe it's true. It's like the other caller said. How many shootings have been done in Canada alone with an AR-15? And like Buddy said, I own an AR-15. It shoots a little tiny bullet that's a little bit bigger than 22.
Okay, you have one. Pardon me. You say you have one yourself?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm. And it's not a big, crazy, hairy item. It's like Buddy said. It's mostly for sport shooters to keep their accuracy and shooting and stuff like that. I've been out hunting many times. I don't run into anyone out there with an AR-15 shooting.
And what's your Russ? I'm over time here, but what's your plan with your firearm?
Oh, I'll keep mine. I'm not giving my gun up. I don't believe that the Liberal government will be in long enough to keep this
Russ,
going much longer. But thanks for having me. I know.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I do have to wrap up here. I'm just going to ask one last question of Rob Gordon. We hear from Mayor Kennedy Stewart talking now about using these plans, these new powers to implement a handgun ban in Vancouver. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay. If it's the city of Vancouver, what happens if the person lives in Burnaby or another neighbouring municipality? This is not helpful, in my view. If you're going to prohibit the possession and carrying of handguns in a city area, then it needs to be a metropolitan area. It's just daft to be thinking that somehow this is going to be effective. It's left to municipalities.
Rob Gordon, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
All right.
You take care.
Okay, Michelle.
That's Rob Gordon, criminology professor at Simon Fraser University.